St. Vincent's Basilica, Napa Valley. A warm afternoon. I, Rosalind Hawthorne, 72 years old, stood in front of the mirror in the sacristy, adjusting my mother's antique brooch. A cameo with a gold edge, suited for a solemn moment. I heard laughter from the other side of the half-open door, a high-pitched giggle, and a man's voice speaking too low for a holy day. I froze, like someone sensing the ground shift before an earthquake. I'm not one for easy tears. I grew up among vineyards and ledgers, took over the family winery after my husband died, and learned that in California. You keep a stiff upper lip, even when your soul is shaking, as soon as he signs, said Vivian Langford, my son Everett's bride-to-be. I'll get power of attorney to handle the wineries and sell a couple of parcels. With that, I pay off my debts and we take off. My heart gave a dry jolt. I felt the fabric of my dress tighten. The cousin, in an urgent tone, asked if she was sure. She said yes in Napa. You don't mess around. She owed more than $500,000 to people who don't forgive. Lenders with soft hands and knife-sharp stares. This ends today, she said, or they collect with terrifying interest. My name came out of her mouth like she knew me. I've got Mrs. Hawthorne eating out of my hand in the first week. I ask for the favor, and she gives it. If Everett gets nervous, we soften him up with the honeymoon talk plans. The happy family. I looked at the cameo. The light hit the glass like it was seeking a warning. I swallowed hard and kept listening. And if the wineries aren't enough, she finished, we push to sell the house in Clear Lake, the one on the waterfront. With that, we pay up and start fresh. My blood burned. Clear Lake was pure memory Everett's childhood laughter, his father's hand, grape clusters like lanterns at sunset. I closed my eyes to hold back tears. This wasn't the time. I opened the door just a crack. I saw the gleam of Vivian's dress and the cousin's nervous shadow. I closed it carefully. I breathed deep, slow, like putting out a fire with a glass of water. I could have said, the wedding's off. But one thing I've learned over the years, sometimes justice doesn't come yelling. It arrives on time and in silence. I wasn't going to break up the party. I was going to turn it into a trap. If Vivian thought she had me in her pocket, today she'd find out I'm not loose change easy to stash away. I stepped out of the sacristy with the brooch on my chest and a smile firmly in place, like wrapping a shawl to cover the chill. The murmur of St. Vincent's Basilica enveloped me, white flowers, light incense, an organist testing chords as if measuring the day's pulse. I walked down the central aisle on my own arm, upright, feeling gazes fall like petals. No one suspected a thing. I wasn't going to give them reason to. Everett sought me out with his eyes from the front. My son is in his 40s, but when he's excited, his face turns boyish, that mix of nerves and faith that always softens me. Beside him, Vivian, properly beautiful, looked fresh out of a storefront. I already knew what she'd said minutes before. Still, I tuned my smile like an instrument and offered it to the people I love. In family, you don't make a scene, you take notes and act. Fletcher, my grandson, was in the second row in a navy suit, 27 years old. Sharp eyes, life raised him fast, but it didn't take his nobility. He caught my gaze with that silent question only those who know us well can ask, Grandma, what's going on? I answered with a long blink. Later, I saw him nod slightly, like he was keeping a secret with me. The priest cleared his throat, opened his arms, and began the ceremony. I listened and didn't listen. The forever sounded different, like glass under harsh light. People laughed softly, shifted. Someone coughed. Out of the corner of my eye, I measured Vivian's posture, neck high, chin in place, hands crossed as if praying, but fingers don't lie. They tapped a quick rhythm against the bouquet. a beat of urgency among the group of friends. I spotted Miriam Caldwell, with her impeccable white hair and jade bracelet. Those who don't know her think she's just another grandmother. Those who do know she was an ironclad lawyer in San Francisco. She held my gaze and tilted her head just enough to show she was ready. I'd called her early, without details. She doesn't need many. Miriam is the type who understands before you finish the sentence. When it came to the readings and vows, I played my role as mother of the groom with precision. I clapped on time, nodded where needed, hugged those who sought my shoulder. If social theater is an art, I performed without faltering. No one saw the thread. No one saw the needle. And yet, stitch by stitch, I was already sewing the bag where Vivian would store her own lies. The reception unfolded like any well-planned banquet string music, measured toasts, and that constant hum of voices and silverware. I ate little. I preferred to save my appetite for what really mattered. At the first chance, I approached Miriam, who was chatting with two ladies from her book club. "I need you to check something," I whispered as I hugged her. "Public records, background, everything you can find on Vivian Langford." She didn't ask why. Miriam is the type who knows some questions come later, while everyone clustered around the cake. I approached Fletcher. I feigned interest in the decorations, but my words went straight to his ear. "I want you to follow her for a few weeks. Discreetly. Note where she goes, who she talks to. If anyone's looking for her." Fletcher didn't hesitate a second. He grew up hearing stories of how I defended the Hawthorne wineries from more than one grab attempt. He knows when I ask for something like that, it's not on a whim. The first sign came 3 days later. Miriam called from her home office, surrounded by folders. "Rosalind, Ms. Langford has more cobwebs than a closed cellar. Huge debts with lenders from the Mission District neighborhood. Several overdue promissory notes, usurious interest, and a curious fact 2 years ago. She tried to marry a businessman from Austin. Everything was on track until he discovered she'd pawned his mother's jewelry." As I processed that, Fletcher arrived with his notebook. He'd tailed Vivian to a cafe near the Ferry Building marketplace. There, she met a man who needed no introduction to me, Reginald Blackwood. The name tasted bitter. 20 years ago, in one of the winery's worst winters, Reginald tried to buy it at rock-bottom price, exploiting a drought that left us without a harvest. I turned him down, and we hadn't spoken since. She handed him an envelope. Fletcher said. He counted it, opened it, and smiled like he'd already won. That was all I needed. Now I knew Vivian wasn't just in debt. Her debt was tied to one of the men who'd most wanted to see my family name wiped off the wine labels. And if Reginald Blackwood was in the game, the risk wasn't just losing properties, it was losing the entire legacy. It wasn't easy to decide. But sometimes, to put out a fire, you have to use fire. 2 days later, I showed up in Healdsburg, in front of the old stone house where Reginald Blackwood has his office. At first glance, it looks like a real estate firm, but anyone who knows the area knows they negotiate everything but houses there. I entered with a firm step. The assistant, a young man with a shifty gaze, barely got my name out when the back door opened. "Rosalind Hawthorne," Reginald said, letting my last name hang like an aged wine in a glass. "If this isn't a miracle, it's a bad omen." His office smelled of leather and tobacco. He, with whiter hair but the same fox-like smile, invited me to sit. "I'm here to propose something," I began. "And no, it's not selling you the wineries." He leaned forward. Curious. I told him enough to pique his interest. Vivian owed him a considerable sum, and I needed that fact to come to light. But at the precise moment, no rough stuff, no scandals that tarnish Everett, I clarified. Just enough so everyone sees who she really is. Reginald interlaced his fingers, evaluating like he was sniffing a juicy deal. And what do I get? A portion of the debt, paid by me in cash. I said, by me, with the serenity of someone who knows the other is doing mental math. He smiled. Slow. Interesting. Never thought we'd work together one day. He extended his hand, and for the first time in 20 years, I shook it. It was a cold, calculated grip. Done. I'll show up when you say, with the excuse of collecting, and no violence. I nodded. We parted like old rivals taking a breather. But in my mind, it was clear that money was never leaving my hands. Reginald thought he had me tied up. He didn't know I was already weaving a plan where he'd be just one more piece. Stepping out into the street, the Healdsburg sun hit me full on. I walked slowly, feeling like I'd just aligned an enemy on my own board. And in that game, the pieces that think they move alone eventually discover someone else is directing the play. I returned home with the certainty that the first move had to look like a gesture of goodwill. That night, while Everett dined with me on the terrace, I spoke to him in a calm voice, as if thinking aloud, Son, I know Vivian wants to feel part of the family. What do you think about giving her limited power of attorney something for minor purchases? Practical matters. So she doesn't feel sidelined. Everett, naive as always when it came to heart matters, smiled immediately. Sounds good, Mom. She's going to be happy. I poured him more wine, hiding my own smile. He thought it was approval, really. It was the reflection of a play already 2 steps ahead. The next day, I called Miriam. We met in her study, where the smell of old paper mixed with fresh brewed coffee. I need a decoy document, I told her, one that looks innocent. But if she exceeds its powers, it constitutes fraud without room for interpretation. Miriam arched an eyebrow. Intrigued, how much do you want to limit her? She can't touch a dime from the main accounts or sell properties, only minor purchases. Maximum $50,000, and always with receipts. If she breaks that rule, let the paper be her sentence. I watched her write, with that scalpel precision that made her feared in her lawyer days. Each clause was a polished trap, hidden under friendly language. 2 days later, in the dining room of the house, we presented the document. Vivienne arrived in a floral dress and a practiced smile. Everett explained it was a detail to integrate her into the family administration. Of course. My love, I trust you, she said, taking the pen like signing a birthday card. She barely skimmed the first pages. She didn't ask about limits, didn't hunt for fine print. She signed with a quick stroke and looked up to kiss Everett on the cheek. I gathered the copies and stored them in a leather folder, with the same care as guarding a sharpened knife. Outside, the Napa afternoon closed with heavy clouds, as if it knew something was about to break. The ballroom of the Demetria Hotel was dressed in warm lights and gleaming glasses. The toasts flowed amid laughter and conversations, while a string quartet provided the perfect backdrop. I stood beside Everett, a glass in hand, half listening to compliments and well wishes. That's when the side door opened and Reginald Blackwood entered. Impeccable in a dark suit, with a smile that boded ill. Ms. Langford, what about the $3,500,000 debt? He paused for everyone to absorb it, planning to pay it with the Hawthorne lands. The silence was instant. Even the quartet stopped playing. Gazes turned to Vivienne, who froze with her glass halfway to her lips. What is this man saying? Everett stammered. Bewildered, I, with the calm of someone who'd rehearsed every move, furrowed my brow in feigned surprise. Everett, maybe we can clear this up right now. I turned to Vivian. If there's nothing to hide, we can speed through some papers to make everything clear. Okay. The pressure of the stairs wrapped her like a noose. Vivienne swallowed, but nodded, trying to regain composure. I pulled a folder from my purse, the one prepared with Miriam, and placed it on a nearby table. Fletcher, across the room, discreetly turned on his phone camera, hidden among table flowers. Here it is, I said, opening the document. Just sign to confirm you're acting within the agreed limits. That way. No doubts for anyone. Vivienne, feeling the weight of the situation and the growing murmur, took the pen with tense hands. She signed quickly, without reading past the header. The ink was still fresh when Fletcher saved the evidence, capturing every stroke. Reginald, satisfied with his role, inclined his head and left without more, leaving behind a thick, expectant air. I raised my glass again, as if the incident had been a simple misunderstanding. But inside, I knew that, with that signature, Vivienne had just sealed more than a paper she'd signed her own downfall. Barely 4 days passed after the scene at the Demetria Hotel before Vivienne showed her true face. It was a humid afternoon in Napa when Miriam called, her tone sharper than usual. She's at the notary. Rosalind wants to move $500,000 from the winery account to a personal one. Says the power allows it. I settled the phone against my ear and felt that tingle of confirmed suspicion. Is Fletcher there? Yes, recording everything, Miriam replied. She has no idea the trap she's walking into. Meanwhile, Fletcher watched from a back table, using a folder as cover. His phone discreetly aimed at the window where Vivienne argued with the notary. She wore a light suit and that impatient air of someone who thinks money comes with a snap of the fingers. Of course I can authorize it, she said, pushing the document toward the official. I have power of attorney. The notary, a meticulous man with a perfectly trimmed mustache, leafed through the paper calmly. It clearly states here that transfers can't exceed $50,000 and must be justified, he replied. Vivienne frowned and forced a smile. Must be a mistake. But at that moment, Miriam stepped in, folder in hand. It's no mistake. Ms. Langford, it's fraud. Vivienne paled. Fletcher captured the reaction, every blink and stutter, like evidence in a televised trial. And then, the final blow while waiting, reviewing messages on her phone. Fletcher spotted an open email on her screen. There was the full plan Vivienne was secretly negotiating with a third party in New York, the sale of the wineries. Behind Everett's back, and even Reginald's, my blood chilled. Not from surprise, but from the magnitude of her ambition. She wasn't just a daughter-in-law with debts. She was a traitor willing to sell the Hawthorne legacy piecemeal, like fairground merchandise. That afternoon, I confirmed Vivienne's fall couldn't be quiet. It had to be exemplary. The meeting was in the main dining room of the family home, the one overlooking the garden with blooming bougainvillea. I closed the curtains to control the light and asked Fletcher to set up the projector. At 6 sharp, they all arrived Everett with a confused air. Vivienne trying to appear calm in a red dress too flashy for the occasion, and Reginald with that slow but firm step of someone who knows something big is about to unfold. Thank you for coming, I said, settling at the head of the table. What you'll see today is definitive. The first image on the screen was Vivienne at the Demetria Hotel ballroom, signing the document in front of everyone. Then, the video at the notary, trying to authorize the $500,000 transfer. The audio caught her words clearly, her insistence, and the exact moment the notary reminded her of the power's limitations. Vivienne started fidgeting her hands, nervous. That's taken out of context. but I didn't give her room to continue. The next projection was the emails Fletcher had recovered messages to a businessman in New York, negotiating the sale of the wineries without Everett's knowledge, or Reginald's. The silence that followed was like a sharp blow. Reginald leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So you were planning to scam me too, Vivienne." His deep voice echoed in the room. She lowered her gaze. Reginald looked at me then, and for the first time in 20 years, our wills aligned. "Rosalind, count on me for whatever comes next," he said, with a chill that cut the air. Everett, meanwhile, seemed to sink into his chair. His eyes darted from Vivienne to me, searching for a crack in that avalanche of evidence. "I can't believe it," he whispered. Miriam, who had stayed to the side, opened her briefcase and placed several documents on the table. "Here's the formal complaint for attempted fraud and breach of trust. It already has a date and time to be filed." Vivienne tried to speak, but I looked at her directly. With the serenity that only certainty brings, "This isn't revenge, Vivienne. It's protecting what's ours." In that instant, I knew the game was over. The checkmate had been clean, public, and above all, irreversible. The following days were a whirlwind. Miriam's complaint proceeded, and in less than a week, Vivienne was summoned to testify before the district attorney. The charges were clear attempted fraud and breach of trust. The power of attorney was officially revoked, and her attempts to downplay the facts in the local press crashed against the mountain of evidence we'd gathered. Everett came to see me one afternoon, his face gaunt and shoulders slumped. We sat in the living room, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee seemed to soften the words he struggled to say. "Mom, I didn't see what was happening. Forgive me." I looked at him with tenderness, but also firmness. Family is protected with love, Everett, but defended with intelligence. And this time, we had to do both at once. He nodded. Without trying to justify himself, I think in that moment he understood it wasn't just about saving the wineries or the house, but preserving something deeper, the dignity and history those walls held. Fletcher, for his part, stepped up. He proposed a system of controls and transparency for the winery administration, with family-accessible accounts and quarterly audits. I saw him handle the meetings with a poise I hadn't known in him. He seemed to grasp that legacy isn't inherited just on paper, but in responsibility. Reginald, curious in his way of showing gratitude, sent a case of aged bourbon bottles with a brief note, "To enemies who know how to make peace." I expected no less from him, a calculated gesture, but honest. A month later, I found myself walking through the vineyards in Sonoma, as the sun fell over the rows of grapes and the breeze carried the sweet scent of the earth. Amid the rustle of leaves and the crunch of soil under my steps, I thought about everything that had happened. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't the one that destroys the enemy, but the one that lets what they tried to break flourish stronger. I looked to the horizon, where the plants stretched like a green sea, and knew the Hawthorne legacy would live on long after I was gone.